Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. Well, today we want to set the framework for how we save successfully. We want to be able to teach those that we're leading and learn ourselves how to get really effective in how we approach our saving strategies. And one of the things about saving is that it is really just future spending. You know, we like to think of it as preparing for future obedience. We want to be in a position where if God tells us to take action, to lift a burden, to be intentional in linking arms with Him in the work that He's doing, by saving, we are prepared to say yes to His command. And that is incredibly important for us to get to a place where we feel confident and steady and we're willing to step into that obedience in the future. One of the problems with saving is that there's nothing about it that feels all that good today. You know, when you think about saving for a really long-term future goal like retirement, for example, building towards that goal takes a lot of time and an incredible amount of discipline, and we are seeing these accounts grow really, really slowly. All the while, there's constant bombardment of new opportunities to spend money. Saving money doesn't actually get very much attention. We don't feel a sense of urgency towards it. We're not pulled into it like we are pulled into spending. And so this is why I say often the hardest part about money is the having of it, just letting it sit there, not getting in its way. Saving is the ultimate test of that difficulty, because by definition, we are just having it. We're setting it aside. We're letting it be there. All the while, we're having opportunities of what we could do with it, filling our brains. You know, we could go on that vacation if we weren't saving for retirement. We could, buy that new car if we weren't saving for our emergency fund. We could do all these other things if saving weren't getting in the way. So often we see savings as the obstacle to our current enjoyment. And that is such a messy thought because it's constantly discrediting the discipline that we're putting into saving. It kind of shortcuts our brain and makes us think that saving isn't as valuable because all these other things would feel really good right now. And saving doesn't even feel good eventually. It feels better over time as we see those accounts grow, as we get to a place that has more confidence and more stability. But as that is happening, there's very little reward in our brain. We're not getting these shots of dopamine where we're saying, oh, that felt so good. When we spend money, we get inundated with that dopamine rush. So one of the things that I think is really important is for us to establish rewards. We need to give ourselves the feeling of the win of having followed the discipline. We need to experience that dopamine hit, so to speak, for having done the things we're supposed to do rather than doing the things that we want to do. And so what that looks like, in my mind, is we need to build out a framework of where we need to be, what are some of these basic levels of saving that we need to achieve. And as we achieve those basic levels of saving, we need to build in some way to reward ourselves, to pat ourselves on the back for having done the hard work of saving. So let's just real quick recap. What do we need? What are some of these foundational levels that we need to work toward in order to get to a place of stability and confidence? The first is we need to have an emergency fund. That emergency fund, at a minimum in our mind, is 2% of your annual gross income. That is a really low bar. That is just getting you to a place where if the furnace goes out or the car needs new brakes or something happens, you're not dipping into credit card debt to take care of a current need, because you have prepared for a short-term emergency and you can absorb those kinds of hits without having to go into debt to do so. 2% of your annual income is kind of the lowest bar that you can set. I don't want you to think that just because if you've got a $100,000 income as a household, the fact that you have $2,000 in your savings account means you can go blow everything else. This is just the starting point. If you don't have that in place, that's where you need to get really restrictive and really shut down your spending habits in order to at least get over that initial hurdle. Once you've gotten that initial hurdle out of the way, we don't want to stop. We want that to grow and become ultimately what we call your 3-month net. We want to have 3 to 6 months worth of your net income saved, prepared for the future, so that those even bigger short-term needs can be absorbed. And maybe you lose an income, one of you loses your job, or you have a short-term setback, or you have to take a demotion and your income goes down for a period of time. We need to be able to absorb those changes by having 3 to 6 months worth of income, net income in our opinion, set aside, waiting for those kinds of circumstances so that we can deal with the transition, make the adjustments that need to be made. Because a lot of times when something large like that happens, you can't just change where you live right away, or you can't just go sell everything that you don't need, overnight. We've got to be able to have some transition time to make changes that make sense based on what it is that caused that transition to happen in the first place. So if we've established that 3-month net, that 90 days worth of income, now we can start to really build towards replacement savings. That next layer is that we want to be prepared to pay cash for the next car that we need, or we know that we're going to need to replace our washer and dryer, let's say. We don't want to be in a position where those things catch us off guard. We don't want to find ourselves going and financing those next purchases, because those tend to be bigger ticket items. If you're going to buy a car, you see that coming. You can tell that the car that you're driving is struggling. So we need to be intentional about preparing for the replacement of that vehicle. And we can do that over time if we're intentional with our replacement savings. We're thinking about these as separate goals. They don't have to be in separate bank accounts. They just need to be compartmentalized in our mind and in the way that we're building our spending plan, so that when it's time to buy that car or to replace the dishwasher that we know is about to go out, we are prepared with the cash on hand to make that purchase without financing costs. So as we have layered those things in place and we now have a stable foundation to stand on, now we know something weird breaks, something goes sideways, we lose an income for a period of time, we can stand confidently that we can absorb those things, that we're ready for those kinds of minor setbacks. Then we're really able to turbocharge our savings and aim towards those longer term goals. When we think about those longer term goals, primarily, we're talking about saving up for retirement. If college savings, sending your kids to college is a high priority, that would be in that bucket, assuming your kids are young. So we are building these things that are 15, 20 years in the future. And those are slower, longer runways where we are just building on the effect of compound interest. We are putting money into these longer term vehicles. They tend to be tax advantaged vehicles, which is great. We can let that growth happen and not be impacted or hindered paying taxes all the while. And so we're talking about things like 401ks with your employer, 403bs if you're in that type of program. Roth IRAs are wonderful. I think they are the best thing that we have to really save into, because they are not deductible on the front end as a contribution, but they all come out. All the growth comes out tax-free in retirement, which is a massive win. We can be more confident in our cash flow and modeling how much we need if the money that we're pulling out of those plans doesn't have a tax effect. So Roth contributions inside your employer plan, 401k, 403b, and individual Roths, those are really, really powerful tools. We want to be taking advantage of those. We want to be getting as much as we can from the employer. So if they offer a match, get all of it. Save to the point where you have maxed out that employer match. We want to be funding to the degree that we can max out our individual Roth IRAs. Those are those retirement vehicles that don't feel like they're moving very quickly. You're putting money in and it feels like a grind, but you will be shocked at how quickly compounding really turns that thing on and creates a much larger pile of resources than you actually put in. And that's the beauty of those longer term goals. The sooner you start with the smallest amount you can, the bigger that number gets on the back end. So often we put that off. We say at some point when I can really save aggressively, then I'll start saving for retirement. We need to flip that script in our brain. We need to think about saving for retirement as something that we start immediately with as little as we have. It doesn't matter, whatever it takes. If you can put $25 in each paycheck, that is better than waiting until you can put $100 in each paycheck. Just get that ball rolling. It's amazing how fast it builds. For college saving, one of the things that's really important is we don't want to over prioritize college funding to the extent that we sacrifice our preparedness for retirement. We need to take care of ourselves first. We need to make sure we're going to be okay. Our kids might have to get some student loans. They may have to pay some of their college costs. That's okay, because it's way better than us paying for all their school, but then when they graduate, they need to take care of us because we have not prepared for our own needs. Make sure you are set up well first, and then you can prioritize funding for your kids' college funds. And those things really are effective in plans like 529 plans for college. There's some great structures out there that allow you to fund your kids' education costs tax efficiently. So that's the practical blocking and tackling, layering of these needs for saving. One of the challenges that we will always have when it comes to saving is that we are saving simultaneously for events that happen sequentially. So in other words, you can't sequentially save for your needs. You can't say, well, I'll go ahead and fund retirement first, and then I'll save for this, or then I'll save for that. You're saving for everything together, even though they're going to happen in this really long, stretched out timeline. You're saving for all of those things simultaneously. And that's why it can feel overwhelming a lot of times. Those all feel like hills that are really hard to climb, and you need to basically be climbing them all at the same time. But one of the ways that that starts to really become effective is that as you hit some of these timelines, as you get to a place where you've replaced the car, or you've gotten to a place where now you know you're not going to need to buy that next big household appliance for a while, the money that you were saving into those things can cascade down into another goal. And so once we've set the discipline of saving really effectively, then as those needs change, those dollars that were directed into a certain goal can now go and be redirected into supercharging and building up even more towards another goal. We can actually get more and more effective over time as we get more disciplined and comfortable with saving. One of the things that savings ultimately needs to do is it needs to become normal. We need to just get used to it. And that takes time. You got to get several months, several years even under your belt of doing this discipline in order for that discipline to become natural. It's just like running a marathon. You know, if I told you tomorrow go run a marathon, you can't. It's physically impossible. You would need to build up your endurance, your muscle strength, your cardiovascular system. It's very similar with saving. We need to just keep moving towards that discipline and building our strength in that discipline. And then all of a sudden, it becomes easier. It feels easy because we're used to it. Let's talk really quickly about the spiritual characteristics that are related to saving. The thing that's really fascinating to me about our spiritual character is that we need to have certain aspects of that character in order to really step into saving well. And also, while we're building that discipline, that spiritual characteristic grows in us. We get stronger in that capacity. One area that I see all the time get enhanced by saving is this idea of contentment and gratitude. Because part of the saving discipline means we have to say no to spending, we get better at saying no to spending as we get more effective and more disciplined at saving. And so these things feed on each other. You get better at the having of money because you have consistently been saying no to spending in order to build up your saving. And that is a virtuous cycle. It feeds on itself in a good way. We get stronger and stronger at being content. We get used to the marketing messages telling us we need things, and we get better at saying, no, I don't. It's a really, really powerful cycle. One of the other characteristics that I see really grow through saving is perseverance. Because there's not so much of a jolt of reward in that savings experience, what ends up happening is we get used to doing things even if we don't get that immediate reward. We get better at enduring and continuing to step into that discipline, even if it's not feeling good or we're not getting a win out of it immediately. And saving is one of those things that doesn't give you enough reward to self-reinforce. And so you grow in your ability to do things that are hard and don't give you any sense of immediate reward. That delayed gratification muscle grows in us. And I actually think that's a spiritual growth. We get to a place where we can see the rewards in heaven, the win of us delaying gratification to something that's beyond what we can understand, rather than trying to just get all of the experiences and self-indulgence now. We can recognize the beauty of delaying all of that reward into the future and even into eternity. And lastly, I think it helps us to grow in our wisdom and patience. We start to recognize the ways that marketing companies are trying to manipulate us, trying to take advantage of our tendency towards immediate gratification. And we can grow in our wisdom to see that, to recognize what they're doing, and to decide ahead of time not to fall prey to it. It also grows our patience, just like it grows our perseverance. We can be more comfortable and consistent and confident as we wait for compound interest to take over, for things to grow faster. We're not pushing, we're not fighting for the get-rich-quick scheme. We're doing the long game. I say all the time that wealth takes time and time takes time. There's not a shortcut to this. Certainly not one that I've found that ends up actually giving you a result that's sustainable. If we somehow trip into getting rich quick, we tend to see that people have not built the discipline, the muscle, the patience, the wisdom that comes with doing it the hard way, the long way. And so because they haven't built all of those character traits, they end up blowing it. Most lottery winners go bankrupt very quickly because they haven't actually gotten the benefit of that self-reinforcing growth in their spiritual character that comes with disciplined saving. So how do we do this? How do we build towards these savings goals? Well, the first thing, most important thing, is we need to track our spending. We need to understand what our life costs so that we can be really realistic about what changes we need to make in order to make saving available to us. So often people will just turn on a savings goal. They'll kick in their 401k, they'll turn on, saving into their Roth, they'll turn on whatever it is that they're trying to save for, but they don't understand what their total life actually costs. And so they have no frame of reference to know if any of that is actually affordable and sustainable. And so we'll see people building up in their savings while also building their credit card debt because they haven't actually paid attention to those details. We need to track those resources and understand the ins and outs of our current situation before we go changing anything. Once we understand that, then we can start to make plans for how we should change things. We can start to organize around what steps we need to take. We can start to see ahead for things like the car replacement or the next appliance we're going to need to buy. We can start to build towards these goals with some intentionality because we understand what life costs. We know what parts we can sacrifice now, what decisions we can make, and what resources that frees up. And then we can start to apply those with a thoughtful planning approach rather than a haphazard, well, I have a little extra, I'll stick it over here. We need to be more intentional with these resources. Once we've done that planning, whatever we are going to be saving, we need to automate. To the extent that you can, you want this to happen without your intervention. You want money to go where it needs to go without you having to send it there, because it takes away from you the opportunity to say, maybe this month I'll buy this fun thing instead of saving for retirement. We need to turn on the systems that will force that discipline on us so that we don't end up finding these escape routes that send us into self-indulgence and we waste those opportunities to save because we had to make the decision to save. Once we've planned all this, if we know we can afford it, we turn that automation on and let that force that decision, the right decision, the wise decision to be made without us having to think about it anymore. And then lastly, we need to recognize that a dollar that is not spent today is a dollar we can save to spend in the future. And so those trade-offs are really important. We are always facing opportunities where if I don't spend this dollar on this thing that would make me feel good today, I have an opportunity to be more secure and more prepared for future obedience tomorrow. We don't want to overplay that and get to a place where we're so oversaving that we don't actually enjoy anything today. That's not the right balance either. But more often than not, we lose sight of those trade-offs. As our income is growing, because we've set some of these things to be automated, we don't actually take the extra and continue to push it towards savings. We end up allowing our lifestyle to chase that income because we've said, I've already been doing my saving, I'm fine. And a lot of times those trade-offs don't get made because we're not paying attention. We just get drug into a higher lifestyle by inertia more than anything else. And so we need to manage those trade-offs and pay attention to those decisions. These are some of the critical pieces that lead to a wise saver. We don't want to oversave. We don't want to over-prioritize saving and security and get to a place where we find our identity in our wealth, we find our security in our wealth, we see our money as the provider rather than God as the provider. And so we do need to make sure that we establish really defined plans that tell us this is enough. And if there's more than that, we step into generosity. We get more aggressive in our giving. We step into funding causes we care about or helping families who are less fortunate than we are. We move into more and more generosity with confidence because we know what enough looks like. A wise saver is disciplined, but is also thoughtful in avoiding that trap of overaccumulating and tripping into a situation where they're finding all of their security in their money. I hope that this is a helpful framework for you to understand how to think about these moving parts and how to teach others to step into wise saving in order to be successful in that discipline and grow in our spiritual character so that we can honor God with the resources He's given us to manage. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org. to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.